Welcome to the Stanfords Travel Podcast. Mapping your travels since 1853, Stanfords is the world-famous independent map and travel bookshop based in London's Covent Garden. Thank you for joining us on this little podcast adventure.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us, and I hope you've had a wonderful day here at the Destination Show. And Ray, thank you for joining us very, very much.
Very nice to be here.
I'm going to start by giving Ray an introduction, which seems insane to me because Ray is literally one of my heroes. And you know, they say don't meet your heroes, you're disappointed. I can absolutely attest that is not true with Ray. He is everything you expect him to be. So Ray Mears founded Woodland in 1983, which was Britain's first school of wilderness and bushcraft. He became a legend in terms of bushcraft and survival with so many popular TV shows. Ray Mears' World of Survival, Wilderness Walks, Extreme Survival, Wild China, Wild Australia, and Wild France. Always a surprise for people. And Ray specialises in working with Indigenous peoples to learn their methods of wilderness travel, which is often just their everyday lives. Also in 2010, he used his tracking skills to help police track fugitive killer Ray Mears. Welcome, Ray. There was more I could have said.
I'll leave now.
Yes, done. So, talking to Ray before, I know that you've just come back from the Arctic in temperatures that was minus 38. Some people here have probably gone around the stands looking at holidays to maybe see the Northern Lights in Lapland. I imagine that's not what you were doing there. Tell us what you were doing there.
I was teaching people how to live in the north, how to be comfortable at extremely low temperatures. I think the north is probably the scariest of all environments. It doesn't seem so when you're sat at home, it looks beautiful. But when people get there and they stand under the sky and you feel your energy being sapped by the universe, that's an environment that for a large period of the year loses more energy to the stratosphere than it gains.
Wow.
It's pretty scary. And I say to them when they first arrive, do not wander off. You will get lost, you will die. And I mean that.
Yeah.
And 10 days later, I say to them, you can now wander off, you won't die. Because
Wow.
they've learned how to live there. And it's a very simple environment. There are fewer species, there are fewer plants and trees, but the detail and the understanding of the physics and the physiology are really important if you're to enjoy that environment. And it's pretty special. I think of all the things that I teach,
Yeah.
I see the greatest personal growth in that course.
I can imagine.
It's also because we teach people not to sweat. We teach them to stay dry and to be warm. But you can't do that all the time. There are moments where you're going to be sweaty, you're going to be cold. And at those moments, you just have to find a mental strength to deal with it.
Yeah.
And once people connect to that, they can do anything and go anywhere. It's a really special thing.
Does it really only take 10 days?
Yeah, it only takes 10 days. It's an amazing transformation.
Wow. And what would you say to people who are looking and planning there? And it tends to be Northern Lights, let's be honest, that people go to the Arctic or Lapland for. What else is there that you would suggest people would see?
I think going to see the Northern Lights is very special. If you're going to go to see the Northern Lights, take a tripod and a good camera so that rather than just the phones are amazing, but it's not the same when you blow it up. Mostly you're going to be successful, but it can be foggy, it can be cloudy, and you might not be lucky. And I think if you're going all that way, you should also be ready to do lots of other things to enjoy it. Because sometimes I see tourists arrive to see the Northern Lights, and during the daylight hours, they really don't know what to do.
No.
And there's so much to see, so much to do. You should embrace the whole environment because it's a magical place.
Well, and speaking to the people and find out, I guess, how they live there year round, with the huge changes there. Do cold places appeal to you the most?
No, I think the places that appeal to me the most are the dry ones.
Okay.
Because they're more comfortable. But I absolutely love rainforest. I was in Brunei earlier in the year, last year. That was fantastic. I love all of the environment. There was a period in my life where for about 15 years I was literally going one rainforest to another.
Wow.
And I decided I've taken malarial pills too much, so I should stop. So it was nice to go back to the rainforest and rediscover that deep felt love for the environment. I'm very lucky. Bushcraft teaches you to understand an environment in a very special way, and that makes it feel totally home.
Yeah.
And I've been lucky enough in my lifetime to make friends with so many different environments.
And the places that you go tend to be because you're attracted to that wilderness, to those wild spaces. For some people, that would be their idea of hell. Where is your actual idea of hell, conversely?
Places with lots of people. too many people. I don't like that. Yeah.
And as a bushcraft expert and filmmaker, when you've gone to these places, what in particular, or what places and people have been most informative to you, both as a bushcrafter and as a filmmaker and as a person?
I think all of them. I mean, I think what's really special is that my interest in the bush makes me ask questions. Sometimes the questions seem really obvious, and so people don't ask them. And sometimes they're very insightful questions that you can only ask if you're used to being there. So I asked some Inuits in 1996, these old men, how do you make water?
Okay.
And the crew say, well, there's ice everywhere. I mean, yeah, but there's no firewood.
Yeah.
And that question really was very interesting. And the old men then all started to explain how they, in an emergency, they cut their sledge to pieces to make wood.
Oh, wow.
And then they get ice from an iceberg.
Yeah.
And they melt it over the fire. They did this in a very special way. They take a piece of sealskin, which they always have with them, which has fat on it.
Yeah.
And they make the fire on top of that in a depression. So as the ice melts, it runs under the fire.
Yeah.
And then they make a series of little depressions with a gully between each. And so as the water comes out, it's full of fat from the fire.
Yeah.
And they put snow in the gullies, which filters it.
Wow.
And I explained that. That had never been recorded. That's not in any of the anthropological books until that we recorded it. And yet all of the old men had done that for real.
Wow.
So it was really interesting, you're asking what seems like an obvious question,
Yeah.
but it isn't an obvious thing to know how to do. And if you haven't got water, you're in real trouble.
Yeah.
You can't stay warm without water in the north. So, yeah.
And I think it's fair to say from stories such as that the people that you meet are as important, if not more important, than the places that you're in. Is there anyone in particular who's been very instrumental to you in learning the art of bushcraft and learning what you know?
All of the people I've met. All of them. I mean, we made a point in the 90s of seeking out the older generation who had lived completely the old life, and they're all gone now.
Yeah.
And it was really special. I didn't realize how fast things would change.
Yeah.
I wish I'd had that knowledge back then, but we made a point of looking for people who'd lived completely the old life, and that was very special. And you talk to a man who's been born in an igloo or in a tent. Or even in a tree in Africa. It's very special.
I bet. And I suppose at least by recording it, it's there somewhere on record of how it was done. Yeah. And obviously now, 2025 now, the climate crisis. How important do you think travel is these days with that in mind? Knowing obviously what you do of being able to do those kind of trips to preserve knowledge, meet people.
So I know everyone's really concerned as travellers, are they contributing to it? But really, the contribution that travellers make is very, very minor. Mm-hmm. And what is really important is that people go and look with their own eyes and come back to report what they're seeing, because there is a whole political movement to deny or ignore global warming.
Sure.
And we can't ignore it. It's happening. It's real. It's now. And I've seen it come along. So I can tell you that in Greenland, 10 years ago, the rate of melting was half of what it is today. So in 10 years, it's doubled. And today, the ice, so Greenland is the largest island on Earth, has a huge volume of fresh water, enough that when the glacier, 3-kilometer glacier melts, the sea levels are going to rise by 7 meters.
Wow.
Okay? That will affect London and Holland and there's lots of places. So that ice is melting, at the latest figures, 30 million metric tons per hour.
God, it's hard to get your head around that.
Yeah, and they don't think we can stop that in time.
Wow.
At the same time, if you go to the South Sea Islands, Tuvalu, Tonga, those islands know that they are going to disappear. And it's not a matter of if, but when. And they've now signed deals with Australia to ensure that they can move their whole society to the Australian mainland when the time comes. And they're investing in the education of their children, so they will have jobs, trades that they can use in Australia. What is difficult is the social impact.
Yeah.
So on Greenland, the way of life of the Greenland Inuits has come to an end. They can't subsist as hunters as they once did, and that was really important. I know everyone's anti-hunting, but if you live in Greenland, it's better to hunt than to have to bring in food, which is very costly and very expensive.
It's more sustainable.
They now have a horrendous suicide rate amongst young males because that way of life has come to an end, and they're lost. They don't know what to do. They're having to redefine themselves as a people culturally. These are the impacts of global warming. Now, at the moment, the countries most affected produce less than 0.01 carbon per year.
Yeah.
Britain produces less than 1% carbon per year. China is producing 32%.
Wow.
It's double America's output.
Yeah.
So these little nations they're on the whip end of global warming are suffering. But what's happening there is coming here. You cannot ignore it. It's going to affect everybody on the planet. And there are still people ignoring it, putting their hands over the ears, going, no, I can't hear it. It's not happening.
Yeah.
I'm not mentioning any names. It's happening, and we have to wake up to it so that I don't think we're going to stop it. Certainly we should be trying to. But we need to understand the impact so that we can start to adjust and prepare ourselves to deal with it. We need to be pragmatic about this and honest about it.
And how does that translate in terms of travel? Is there a way we can be travellers with a lower impact on the planet?
I think the travel industry is one industry that's doing a really good job. I mean, from very early on, more ecological use of resources in resorts that's been the norm now for a very long while. I think the travel industry's been pretty proactive about that. I remember writing for a magazine in the 1980s, and that was on the agenda then.
Wow, okay.
So, and I think we're seeing that coming to fruition. So I'm very positive about that. But the most important thing is that we do travel and we meet other cultures and we understand each other, because there is this trend in the world today for people to shut the doors and to misunderstand other cultures. And we need to understand that we are one species on one planet, because the only way we will solve the futures of tomorrow is to work together today.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, we can all see where that's going on now, like you said, without naming names. I suppose that brings me nicely to the idea of travel within the UK, which I know is something you're an advocate of as well as I am. And in particular, the book, which was your most recent one on British Woodland. What is it about this terrain that's so special to you?
Britain.
Yeah.
It's so diverse. We have the most diverse island on Earth. I mean, I can't think of anywhere else where you travel 50 miles and the landscape completely changes. Not just the landscape, but if you look close enough, the culture, the accent, the people, the attitudes. And I think that's really special. And we need to cherish how magical Britain is and go full out to protect it. I mean, it's a very special place.
And when it comes to woodlands, so I have a little boy, and the gruffalo is found in the deep, dark woods. You know, I remember from my childhood the wolf who was going to get Red Riding Hood, Hansel and Gretel with the witch hiding. Why do you think the woodland in particular has been this terrain we've kind of like maligned to be a bit dangerous, a bit kind of something to be scared of?
Do you think that? That's really interesting. I think that probably goes back to early farming cultures. I mean, I think if you look at our oldest book in our language, Beowulf, which is written for a farming community, and the monster Grendel comes from the uncultivated land.
Right, yeah.
But if you go back further, you work with hunter-gatherers, and it's all about how they outwit things that are dangerous.
Okay.
So there's a changing attitude there. But we think of Britain as a wooded island, and we're not.
No.
We're the least wooded country in Europe, and this is something we need to do more to correct. And it's not just about planting trees, it's about protecting particularly our ancient woodlands, which are the most diverse, the most important in terms of carbon capture. We need to protect them. Many of our oldest trees have less protection in law than a red telephone box. Yeah. I mean, it's nuts. You know,
why do you think that is? Why do you think we're so keen to protect a building or a thing rather than a tree?
We've lost our connection to organic things. I mean, I think the outpouring of love for the tree on Hadrian's Wall was very interesting.
Yeah,
I think that was great.
Yeah.
And it's surprising how many people visited that tree. But woodland is very special, and you know, the oldest tree in Britain is a yew tree that grows in Perthshire.
Yeah.
And that's estimated to have been a seedling 5,000 years ago. So within the lifetime of that one tree, most of our woodland has been cut down.
Wow.
If that tree could tell stories, what stories it would tell.
Yeah.
And that's how recently this change has come about.
Yeah.
And this is something we can correct. And I hope that our generation can hand on to the next generation improving circumstances. I feel though, I'm 61 in a couple of days' time, and it's like, I know that young people blame my generation for the problems, but actually, we were the first to identify the problem and to try to do something about it.
Yeah.
I think we need to wake up to these things and understand these problems don't get fixed in one generation. It will take many.
Definitely it will. And what I love is, you said about the disconnect with nature that people have. And what I love about British Woodland, your book, is that you talk about the uses of the trees through cultural groups, people throughout history. You talk about the hornbeam and Romans using that on the battle carriages, but conversely the leaves to pack wounds. The Sioux who call the ash, I think it is, the weapon wood. Such wonderful examples. How important was Woodland? And I know you go into it in the book. How important was it to the development of us being able to sit here now on this stage and have this conversation?
It was very important, and I think that we forget that. One of the things about Britain was our navy. Our shipbuilding was tremendously important. And I know there are a lot of people today who want to knock our imperial past, but actually Britain worldwide has had from my experience traveling, we've had a very positive impact on the world. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of people who try to undermine that at the moment. We must guard against that. One of the things I really believe in is the Commonwealth. And the Commonwealth is the most unique thing. We make fun of each other.
Yeah.
And we make fun of ourselves. That self-deprecation is common across the Commonwealth. But the key thing, I think, that when I've been to Commonwealth countries around the globe, is that each country tries genuinely to make a positive contribution to the world, to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Not selfishly, but magnanimously. And I think that's something we should cherish, enhance, and build upon.
Definitely. And I think when it comes to even further back than that, the fact that wood is what created fire, which able to us to cook, it was revolutionary, right? Without the trees, we wouldn't
be here now. Nobody would be here because there'd be no metal to bring you here, no cars, no trains, no metalled roads. Everyone would be naked because we wouldn't have the machines to weave the cloth. Wood and fire gave us everything. We were able to take rocks and make metal. Fire and trees, so important to our past.
And it's such a shame that I almost feel that people have forgot that right back to ground zero.
And they're living sentient things.
Yeah.
So people laugh. I had a radio presenter, well-known radio presenter, so trying to sort of trip me up, said, "So do you hug trees, Ray?" I said, "Yeah, don't you? Why wouldn't you?
I do.
They're alive and they're sentient. They reach out for the sunlight and they live long, slow lives compared to ours, but they're living things, and I think we share our lifetimes with other living entities, and having respect for them is fundamental to life. It doesn't mean to say we don't utilize them.
Yeah.
But if we have respect, then that guides our hand in how we utilize natural resources, and that's the key thing.
I think a really good example is in the book you talk about and how a tree gives apple and we can eat the apple, but then if we eat too many of the seeds, it takes away again because that can kill you.
Yeah.
And I love the idea of it's this mutual, we're both living things that have to respect each other. You talk quite a lot in the book about sort of this prehistory. You beautifully weave together kind of the history of people, really. And you talk a bit about sort of time travel and an ancient hunting ground, which I think was somewhere between Heathrow and the M40, and it just blew my mind. If you could go back in time in Britain to any time and any place, where would you choose to go and why?
I'd like to see Britain. I think I'd like to see Britain most in the Mesolithic.
Okay.
It's the zenith of our hunting and gathering, when Britain was very much as it is today. It was warmer and wetter, and mostly woodland, 99% woodland. There's just a tiny strip in the north that wasn't. Of course, there were glades where trees fell,
Sure.
and along the rivers. But then we would see all of our species in their correct context. There are plants today that you only see growing along roadsides. We've forgotten what their natural habitats are, and that I would really like to see.
Just hearing that, how much trees we had, it's quite impossible. It's like sometimes when you go somewhere now, like the Lake District, you just you can't picture. Everyone's like, it's beautiful. It's like, actually, it should have been covered with trees. I've heard that you could be blindfolded and still tell what trees are in a forest. Is that right? How could you, what are the ways you could do that?
Your different trees, leaves make different sounds. If you want to try that, you should start with aspen, which the leaves really wiggle. But you can, once you start learning to look for resources and you tune into your hearing, you can do that. You can work out what trees, and even the different seasons, or if you have a very hard, dry summer, you can hear that in the leaves. You can hear the leaves suffer, the trees are suffering because they're dry.
Wow. And your tree knowledge and the tree knowledge you give us in this book is immense. How do you remember it all? Because that's the thing, I read your books and I'm mesmerized and I feel like I'm learning stuff, but how do you you've often said you travel with knowledge, that's the best thing you can travel with. How do you remember this stuff?
Well, I think, firstly, to do the work that I do, memory is really important. So all of the other experts I know, they all have good memories. But actually, if you teach a child, this is an oak tree and this is what you do, they forget.
Yeah.
But if you get them to have a go, they never forget, because they've experienced it with their hands. And this business of contact with nature, actually not just looking, but engaging, utilizing natural resources to understand them, is so important.
Yeah.
Because you access many different memory sources. If a child handles sweet chestnut, they can feel the sap on their hands. It can stain their fingers. They can smell the sweetness of the tannin.
Yeah.
There are so many different things that enable you to remember, and that's how you remember, by doing.
And I suppose that's like taking your people up to the Arctic for 10 days. It's like you could just sit them in a classroom and teach them, but actually it's getting their hands dirty.
Yeah,
right?
and I'll ask them after a few days, what temperature is it?
Yeah.
And they can tell me by the sound of the snow,
Wow.
or the look of the trees, because we
That's
teach them
incredible.
that. Yeah.
And they'll remember the experience.
Yeah.
And you mentioned before about hugging trees, and I'm sure I read a stat about it's good for your health.
Yeah.
And I think you mentioned about there being a link to our health and trees, and I think it was a US town where they cut all the trees down, and the cases of heart disease went up.
Heart disease, blood pressure, and pulmonary disorders went up once they cut the trees down. Trees are really good for us. And, we've got this thing about wanting to destroy greenbelt, but you saw the benefit of greenbelt during the pandemic. It was massive for psychological health. And in Japan in the 80s, they had a lot of suicides.
Yeah.
And they wanted so the forest department said, it would be good if people walked in woods. We think it would be good for them. And they came up with this idea they called Shinrin-yoku, which has been translated as forest bathing.
Yeah.
It's kind of a mixture of Shinto and Buddhist beliefs. But the idea is to wander aimlessly in woodland without a plan, allowing nature to grab your interest. And once they defined it, then scientists descended on it. Well, this is defined, we can now test it. And the testing is amazing. You can look at the scientific papers.
Wow.
Every year they're discovering the benefits of being in woodland, to the point where they're now studying which trees have the greatest beneficial impact on us.
Wow.
So we have this link with trees.
Yeah.
We evolved beneath them, within
Yeah.
them. They are important to us. They improve your psychological welfare, they reduce anxiety, but they also, physiologically, you imbibe, you breathe in chemicals which help your immune system and post-operational recovery. There's so many benefits.
Oh my goodness. And I love it. There's a phrase you use in the book that you say, we are tree wealthy.
Yeah.
How can we start to make people see their value in the same way our ancestors did? What could we do to make people, all the benefits you've just described?
Well, it's a matter, I think it depends what generation you're talking about. I really worry about the 20 to 30-year-olds who are obsessed with their phones. They need to get to turn the phones off and look out and see nature. Teenagers are. I mean, that's the great thing. The teenagers are coming back to nature in a big way.
Yeah.
But I worry that one day they'll wake up, perhaps in their 40s, and feel that they've missed out. I've seen that many times with other generations, so yeah.
Yeah. And what do you think we can do as passionate travelers, as passionate people, to help protect the trees, to help people see their value?
You have to fight for them, wherever they are. When people want to come along and chop them down and say, don't worry, we're planting new ancient woodland nearby, you need to explain to them you can't plant ancient woodland.
No.
It takes hundreds of years to develop. What we can do is we can take ancient woodland and protect the land alongside it, and then you have a more rapid regeneration of the woodland, because there is an inoculating effect underground. But ultimately what we're going to discover, where the future is. The trees have led us down to the fungi and the mycorrhizal associations, and people have this avatar understanding of that, which is...
The wood wide web.
Yeah, it's not all as friendly as you might think. But ultimately, what we're going to discover is the most important thing of all, is the earth itself. And native people talk about Mother Earth. And that is true. The soil itself is the most important thing. And we're going to discover that we've damaged the soil. And we're going to have to look at repairing that if we're going to have a harmonious way forward. One of the things I really believe in my travels is that when I go to wilderness, it gives me hope.
Okay.
Not hope, as others have said, that there is still wilderness.
Yeah.
But hope, because wilderness gives us an example of what a natural ecosystem looks like, although it's always in transition.
Yeah.
It gives us a sense of what should be. And we can use that as a model when we manage woodland today. When we manage our green spaces in our parks, open air, we can look to the wilderness and say, how can we replicate that as best we can with our modern technology and our modern use of landscapes? That would be a massive step forward.
Definitely, I think it would. And I will be opening the floor up to any questions you guys might have for Ray, so be thinking of some. I've got a couple more left. I suppose we've talked about why we should love woodland, how important it is to us. Let's talk practical. What are some of your most highly recommended British woodlands that you can tell our audience here to go and explore?
No, I can't say because everyone will go flooding to it. I think the most important thing is to find woodland that is special to you, near to where you live, so that you can visit it on a regular basis and see it through the seasons. That's really important. And nothing is more important than going into woodland just for a minute, sitting and doing nothing. Just sit still. Let nature reveal itself to you. Maybe the tree creeper or the nuthatch are already whistling at the moment because they're thinking they're going to start breeding. And it's just staying alert to what's going on. Let nature come to you.
Yeah, find your nearest.
Yeah, I mean, I live in the countryside. Yesterday I found a fallow fawn, less than a year old, caught on a fence. And, you know, I was able to, normally you can't release them because they're too badly injured. Yeah. But on this case, I was able to. And, you know, I found that simply because I was quiet and I heard this weird disturbance on the fence, which that led me to it. And then I was able to lift it. And the deer, which of course was in great distress, understood that I was trying to help. Yeah. And that's very special when you have those moments. And by lifting it, the pressure comes off of the leg, I could release it. And now it's up to nature to decide whether that fawn lives or dies. But it wasn't so badly injured that it had to be put down. And these are the moments that I think are really special.
And yeah, and I love the idea of choosing a woodland close to you and going back and seeing it change through the seasons and really get into the rhythm of that place. Now, I normally ask the question, what next? But I do know your next book is about tracking. Yeah. Tell us a bit about this. What can we expect from the next Ray Mears book?
It's been a very difficult book to write because it's so close to my heart, but it's something I've been doing for 52 years. It's not about identifying animal tracks. There are lots of books that tell you that. This is about how to follow tracks, how to pick up, and of course, following tracks, you're not following tracks. You're following the little bits in between that are very difficult to see. So that's what the book is about. It explains how to do that.
Wow.
So how to start, how to get good at it, and where to go with it if you really want to take it further. It's a very rare skill today, and a very important skill.
You think it's still a key skill for us?
Oh, it's a very important skill. It still has regular use by police forces, the army, search and rescue. Yeah. It's still using this skill to save lives each day. As we speak, there are people tracking now. But it's one skill of nature observation that transforms your life forever. Wow. You walk into woodland, and if you're used to identifying animal tracks, you might say, oh, that's a fox, or that's a badger. But when you've learned to track, subconsciously you pick up on, that's a female fox, that's the rear left foot, and so on. The detail that you read is much greater, and you do it naturally. Yeah. And that's really interesting. So what is important in being in nature is to allow our subconscious to sort out the complexity of nature. Our subconscious does that much better than our conscious mind. But the more detail you're able to feed in through your senses, the better it can do. So the more you track, the more accurate your subconscious mind is in reading what's going on in the natural landscape.
And definitely put the phone away firmly in your pocket or leave it at home.
Yeah, just turn it off. I mean, I've no issue with phones. They're brilliant. They're going to come along, and there are people working on apps that will tell you what the track is, but we don't need the app. It's easy to learn. You can just use your brain.
Yeah.
And your brain will be able to read things that the phone won't be able to read, not for a long while yet.
It's like, I love the way you talk about making fire, and you talk through your steps and you go, congratulations, you've now learnt a skill that is one of the most important skills a human being can have.
It is the most important.
And if everything went wrong tomorrow, making that fire would be so important.
I mean, in the Arctic, fire means life.
Yeah.
Being able to make it fast, and last day of the course, we challenge everybody to make fire and make water, no cooking pot. And we had somebody there made fire in 4 minutes from scratch. That's good.
And when they came, they couldn't do any of that. Wow. Well, hopefully that's inspired. I feel like we've been prescribed to go and find our local woodland, and we've been told we need to learn to track and definitely make a fire. I'd like to open the questions up to the floor. Would anyone raise a hand if they have a question for Ray?
This is the scary bit. All these seasoned travellers.
Have a lady over there.
Oh. Yes. Good afternoon. You mentioned that in Greenland that the ice melting is going to raise the sea levels by 7 meters. How would that affect Europe in terms of...
It'll be disastrous. So
would it go up 7 meters in Europe, or would it go up correspondingly less?
Yes. So Holland will be in real trouble. London will be in trouble. It's happening now.
What type of time period?
That nobody can answer that question. So it was melting at 15 million metric tons an hour 10 years ago. Now it's 30 million metric tons an hour. And in the Himalayas, the glaciers are melting there. And by 2050, the rate of loss will be irreversible. That's the feeling at the moment. In the Himalayas alone, 240 million people depend on that water. It feeds into 12 rivers, the Ganges, the Indus, the Mekong. It gives people drinking water. It irrigates their fields. When that water disappears, there will be war for water. That's what will happen. The impact of this is massive. And that's what's happening.
So the Thames Barrier would be no use at all? Or even the one they're proposing to replace it?
Yeah. Scary, isn't it?
Yeah, scary.
And there are politicians that we all know going, no, this is all nonsense. And it's not. The science is now really, really well established.
Thank you very much.
We were recently in southern India and reading about it, and it said that they were running out of groundwater. So how does that make sense?
All over the world, people are running out of groundwater because of global warming. So in some places you have water melting, and you have problem then with downstream floods, and then the water's gone. In other places, you have drought. So in Somalia, you have massive problems with drought, and a huge proportion of the population live in refugee camps in Somalia. And the only source of income for young men is to fight in an army of one sort or other, one different guerrilla force. So it's really complicated. So different problems in different parts of the world, but all to do with raising temperatures. So arid areas are becoming more arid. Areas with ice are being inundated by floodwater. And downstream of the glaciers, already in Bangladesh, we're seeing the flooding is causing a displacement of people. So people are now flooding across the borders into other countries. And we all understand how that feels. So the impact is happening now. I have a proposal for a TV program about this. We can't get it commissioned because the money needs to come from America. And the new zeitgeist in America is to ignore it.
What climate crisis? It's funny you said about Greenland. When I went there, and then again 2 years later, and I spoke to an Inuit woman who said that she lost her uncle who was out fishing, who took his dogs, and the ice that you always in February could reliably cross, and it was too thin, and he went through.
It's so dangerous.
Yeah.
And traditional knowledge is failing now because things are changing faster than people can adapt to. So you're exactly right. And Greenland has a population of 57,000, the same as Horsham.
Yeah.
And yet the suicide, I can't remember the suicide rate, forgive me, but the suicide rate is staggering. And if you apply that to a town like Horsham, then you start to understand this is a real issue. And we don't know how these things will affect us when they arrive here.
Have you ever been trekking in Romania? Would you recommend it as a country?
In Romania, no, I haven't, but I understand it would be amazing to go trekking in Romania. So I would love to. I think it would be very interesting, yeah. Trekking you can take everywhere, but Romania has a lot of lovely wild country, so a lot of wildlife, yeah, it would be brilliant.
Do you think enough attention in England is given to looking after trees once they've been planted? You know, you keep hearing we're going to plant thousands of trees, plant thousands of trees. Is there any program for making sure they don't die?
Okay, so if trees are planted, I mean, obviously there's going to be some natural waste. I'm not worried about the trees that are planted. What concerns me most are the trees that are cut down for development. And I live in the most wooded part of England, and a lot of trees get cut down, some without license, on the basis, well, we'll apologise afterwards. Theoretically, there are very strong laws in force. When that happens, the Forestry Commission can insist that the trees are replaced, but they don't follow up. I know that for certain. And they should be following up. We should be taking a far greater interest in the trees that we've already established. Old trees are very, very important ecologically, and we should cherish them, and we should take better care of them than we do. We're not good at that. And very often people come in, trees, you could always find somebody with a chainsaw. If you give them enough money, they'll break the rules. And so we need to enforce the laws that we have more firmly to make it impossible for those things to happen. But very often people cut trees down, they make a new property to develop it, and they sell it straight off because of greed. And that's something we must guard against. I don't know what the answer is. I wish I did. It's human nature. I think our politicians of all colours and creeds do not do a good job when it comes to these things. And we need greater honesty in our leadership.
It seems crazy when you think that people, you normally have to, with travel, it's like, how do we protect this culture? How do we protect this place? Bring tourists in, show it has a monetary value. But when you think of something like Woodland or the environment, which it's not a monetary value, it's actually how we are able to be alive, and no one seems to think that's as important.
So one really important thing about travel, being a tourist, I really believe in, is don't expect the comforts of where you come from when you go somewhere new. To me, to be a tourist is to adapt to somewhere new, to walk in the footsteps of other people, other cultures, other places. So if you go on safari, don't expect 5-star flushing toilets. Get in a tent and adapt to the country, because to provide that luxury is the negative end of tourism, and also the negative end of personal growth. You may step outside of your comfort zone. It may seem scary, but it's always rewarding to have done so. And you grow personally from having stepped back from what you're used to encounter something new and different.
It's like when you go to a tent and find it's got air conditioning and you think there's something quite wrong here. It's funny, you mentioned about politicians not kind of being switched onto this. I think you've said before that you wish you could sit some world leaders down around a campfire in a woodland. What do you think that would do for them?
I would really like to do that, because the great thing about a campfire is that everybody's equal and you get to know each other pretty well. You see the person who's selfish, doesn't collect any firewood, or hogs the warmth, doesn't want to sit in the smoke.
Yeah.
Equally, you see people who are more giving and more contributing. I think that's a great way of getting to know people. And I really like to sit around a campfire and get airs and graces gone, and actually have an honest experience.
Yeah.
You can have a free trade of ideas and opinions without all the razzmatazz and the security men and the pomp and the importance.
I love that. I love the idea of seeing, like, I don't know, the UN all meet and there just being a big campfire and everyone sitting around.
Yeah, and I think even Donald Trump would probably enjoy a bit of wild venison cooked on the fire instead of a burger. That might be good for him.
I mean, that might be pushing it, but I like the sentiment. Do we have any more questions from the audience? We've probably got time for a couple more.
From the point of view of planning for legacy, how to look after woodland going forward, what do you think the most important things are in the UK?
The most important thing is education.
Right.
We have to educate the next generation to love and to cherish trees, to value them, to understand them. I have seen people who are fearful of trees, who've moved to the countryside, and they have them chopped back all the time because they're afraid of them, because they're not familiar. And it's very important to teach the next generation the importance of trees, to leave trees for them to enjoy, but to also very much get them to cherish old trees, trees that have personal associations with, trees that maybe you knew as a child that have been important to you. Pass that legacy on. That's the most important thing of all. It's always down to education. What we love, we will cherish and we'll take care of. What we lack, what we don't understand, we may come to fear, and what we fear, we destroy. Humanity is very good at destroying things. We're not good at cherishing things. If there's one thing I've learned about nature and to be a human, is that we should all in some way act to improve biodiversity. We depend upon nature. We are not separate from it. We are not lords above it. We are servants of nature. And the moment we understand that, we can fulfill a role as a steward. But to do that, we have to understand nature, and that's all about education.
Definitely. Any more questions before we wrap up? I'll ask you one more, Ray. Is there a particular tree above all others? And I'm talking species type, not just tell me the location of this one tree. Is there a species that you go, this is my tree?
Oh, that's really difficult. I have several trees screaming at me. I have a great affinity with the birch tree, which is the tree of life in this part of the world. And it's a pioneer. It creates shade that other trees benefit from. So I feel a kinship with that tree because, in a sense, I go out into the unknown. And I have to take my first aid kit with me, as the birch tree does itself. But at the same time, there's another part of me that loves the yew tree, which I think should be our national tree, not the oak.
Yeah.
And it was once a sacred tree in Britain, and it provided us with so many special things. It's a thoroughbred tree. So it falls between those two, I think.
Yeah.
But I love them all.
And I love the way you end up getting a special connection. I remember in the house where I grew up, when I moved in, there was a silver birch that was the same height as me. And as I got older and saw it grow, it was like my tree. Like I knew every sort of inch of it. As we're at a travel show, I feel like I should end with the last question of saying, is there anywhere you haven't been yet, Ray, that you would love to go to?
There are lots of places I haven't been. It's a very big planet, and it's a very small planet at the same time. It's bizarre. 3 days ago, I was in another world. I mean, going to the Arctic in winter is like going to another planet.
Yeah.
And here I am talking to you now. It's swap minus 38 for frigid Britain. It's weird, isn't it? So the planet is very small, and yet it's also vast. And the more you look at the small details, it becomes even vaster.
Yeah.
And there are lots of places I haven't been that I'd really like to go to see.
Where next?
Difficult to say.
Keeping it close to it. You don't want everyone to go there, do you? Well, thank you so much, Ray. Reading this book, British Woodland, I definitely learned so much. One fact I wanted to pull out was that you said the ash tree supports 100 different species with 30 that are dependent on them. And I think that's just one species of tree alone, like how important just that one is, and there's so many. And if that doesn't make you want to go out and save them, if that doesn't make a politician want to go save them, I don't know what will.
No, there's even a fly that depends upon the rhino, that lives on rhinos.
Really?
And if we lose the rhinos, we'll lose that fly.
And there'll be a knock-on. It's like a Jenga tower, right?
I implore you as travellers to shout about the rhino and the elephant, because we're going to lose those species in our generation, in our lifetime, if we're not careful, all for human greed. It's not enough, and we need to constantly remind people of the need to preserve these animals. The rhino is amazing. I absolutely love them, and they're tender creatures, and not enough gets said. We have people who speak on behalf of them, and that seems to be enough, but it's not enough.
No. Oh, well, thanks for that impassioned play about them. And Ray will obviously be signing copies of British Woodland after this. In it, you'll learn, as I did, about the uses for trees, the edible parts, how to make a hand drill to light a fire, that's on my wish list to learn to do, how to make fibre to stitch with, how to navigate in a woodland. I'm going to also try that with my son. How to build a shelter, and that the Magdalena people were actually stylish and wore well-tailored clothes. There were so many facts in this book that just blew me away. There's photos, illustrations, tons of knowledge distilled into a neat backpack-sized package. So I do implore you to go and pick up a copy. But other than that, thank you very much for coming, and thank you so much, Ray. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Stanfords Travel Podcast. You can find us at stanfords.co.uk and follow us on social media at Stanfords Travel.